Hi, this is Vince. So I'm going to do something a little bit weird, and I'm going to do it quickly. I've written some bullets so that I can follow along, and you can read along at home if you want to. Um, it's 25 years since I finished writing my second novel, Jeremiah Whispers, um, and it's been an interesting thing. I just read over it again, so I thought I'd spend some time talking about Jeremiah's Whispers, um, and sharing some reflections really for my younger writing self, um, really in my own reflections for myself. But I think having spent some time with some students recently talking about storytelling and storycraft, I think there's maybe some learning for everyone who involves themselves in the arts. So let's just jump in here. I'm just going to go really quick and do this. Um, so I hadn't read Jeremiah Whispers since 2002, which was the year that I guess my oldest daughter was born, and the year that we planned to move to the US. It was also the 10th anniversary of finishing Jeremiah Whispers. Um, so it has been an interesting. There's a lot happened in 15 years since then, including publishing four novels and getting reviews for those, and writing a couple of others that are underway. Um, but I'm going to say you haven't heard of Jeremiah Whispers because it's never been published. I think if I was to sit down with a piece of paper, I really could remember every single person who's read it. Um, so it's not published. As I say, it's my second novel. It's about 99,000 words, 240 pages. It's a heavyweight thing. When I first wrote it, I was writing on a word processor where it was single spacing, computer type, and so it's really hard to read. I recently paid for somebody to put it into Word so I could actually format it so I could read it. It's basically a modern Gothic horror story. Let me just read what it's about. So it's basically a group of dead men summoned by Jeremiah, a dark angel. Now he summons them to where he's been locked. It's to his own purgatory that he's stuck in, and he wants to wreak a vengeance havoc on the world. And he can only do that if each man kills the thing he holds most dear. So basically, it's a story of these guys are gathered and are sent back. For that reason, it's told in circles and it's entwined. There's three or four timelines which keep jumping on top of each other. Um, and it's kind of a complex story, but a very simple story because it's basically about something like 8 relationships. And then Jeremiah, who is this omnipresent character in the background, who basically can control everything. So it remains and will remain unpublished. It wears its homage to Clive Barker a little too proudly. I love Clive Barker's writing, and particularly at that time, I was very influenced by Clive Barker and Stephen King, who still both of them remain huge influences. It's a little bit too Clive Barker, really, when I read it now, and I've always thought that from since ever reading it in 2002 at that 10th anniversary. The other reason it will remain unpublished is it would take too much work. I'd have to like basically rewrite the whole thing. And if you don't know the story of Karaoke Criminals, where I wrote the whole story in first person present tense, and then when I got ready to publish, I rewrote the whole thing in third person past tense. So I basically wrote the book twice. Um, I really haven't got any energy to do that with Jeremiah Whispers. It would just take too much. Um, and finally, and this is really what this whole exercise is about, it really is the work of a younger version of me. Um, and so I I kind of like it being there, like Of the Tribe before it, which was the first novel. It's representative of who I was at the time and what was happening in life and what was happening in my own psyche. So it's kind of nice to have it as a time capsule. I wrote another book pretty much immediately on the back of Jeremiah Whispers, which was called Jumbo Georgie. That could make it out, but again, it would take a lot of rewriting. And then basically, I started Disparate Eat Butterflies, and then put that away for 5 years after I got about 60 pages in. Um, and I think I was learning, and what I was learning was my reflections on reading Jeremiah Whispers today. So let's get into the notes to my younger self. Otherwise, I'm going to talk for hours. Um, so the notes to my younger writing self. Here we go, and hopefully these are useful to anyone who writes or anyone who makes art, basically. So you're going to see the headlines all the way through, but let's go through them one by one. So here's the good stuff, and there is good stuff. I knew at the time I was enjoying writing, and there was the beginnings of the writer I think I've become now, and the people tell me I've become. Is the good stuff. You obviously care about your characters and their relationships. You can see that throughout the book. In fact, even now, and knowing the story and knowing what's going to happen, and the clumsiness of some of the storytelling, there are still points in the book that bring me close to tears because of the relationship driven dynamics in there. So I think that's borne out then in subsequent books. So you're gonna do more of that, I guess, for my younger self. You pace the story well, and that's something saying. Given how cyclic and entwined the story is, where it's back and forth and back and forth and in and out, if you tried to write it in a linear fashion, it would be really boring. But the way you pace it is really good, and I know at the time you had that all in your head, so it's great to see it on paper now. And basically, you keep the story attractive. It keeps the reader interested. There wasn't any point in this, even despite the heavy going that it's got, which I'm going to talk about in a second. Despite that, it still keeps you wanting to find out what happens to these people, and I think that basically comes back to characterization and relationships. So those are all good things. Do more of those. But let's talk about the things you're going to learn, and I've written this facetiously as you're going to learn over the next 25 years, because I think you learn a lot of them over the next 3 or 4 years of writing and living. But as I look back 25 years, here's the things you're going to learn. So we'll jump in. Metaphors are much, much better than similes. And this is a really simple thing. When I was taught, when you, younger self, were taught at school, you were taught that similes and metaphors were two routes to achieve the same thing, which was to attach an image in somebody's head to what you were putting on the page. Metaphors are much more powerful because they're less laborious. I guess the similes you choose, you have to explain them a lot. And I'll actually expand this one. It's in the wrong order here, but what you do in Jeremiah's Whispers, and you're going to learn not to do, is once you've described something or position the metaphor, don't describe it again or introduce another metaphor to describe the same thing. That's part of what makes this a clumsy read. Is quite often something that's happening or something that someone's seeing or the thought you're trying to describe. You describe it 2 or 3 times in a row. And it's as a reader, you kind of reading, blimey, I've got it, Vince. You don't need to keep saying that. So that's the thing about metaphors. Use one and use it really well, and you are going to learn to do that. It's you're getting pretty good at it by the time you hit Disparers Eat Butterflies, and by the time you're into Family Rules, you're hitting it pretty hard. Now, one thing that I think is really clear in Jeremiah Whispers is, aside from 2 characters who are adjacent characters to the main guys who are the dead guys, it's all male cast. It's all male, and I think that's a reflection of where you are as you're writing it, and what you're comfortable with and the process you're going through. But what you're going to learn is it's fun to write female characters, and to give away your maleness for a while, and you particularly are going to enjoy doing that when you write escalation. To be in the head of a female lead character who carries the whole story is pretty cool stuff, and that's because it's only when you choose to fully inhabit your characters that you'll bring them fully to life, and you're going to learn that. And as soon as you learn that, which really happens somewhere between Karaoke Criminals and Family Rules, that's the point when you suddenly realize it really is all about the characters. So not just caring about the characters, which is one of the good things you do, but being the character on the page. And so let's just jump down these. The biggest problem with your writing at the moment with Jeremiah Whispers, and you're going to learn it over the course of 5 years before you really get into Disparers Eat Butterflies. You just enough of the he'd just been thinking, she'd just been speaking with. Your writing has a lot of reportage or narration of things after they've happened, rather than just writing them happening. And as I say, it's going to take another novel to bring this to light, but you are going to break the habit. You're going to learn to show the discussion, not describe it after the fact. You're going to narrate the experience, not some character's memory of it. And it's going to turn out you're better at this than you could possibly know at the moment. So stick with it. Learn to write what's happening and have characters speak to each other. Don't describe conversations after the fact. Um, More than anything, the and until I wrote these notes today, I didn't really call it whole person writing, but it seems to stick. So you're going to develop and learn your own style of whole person writing, which really is going to inform everything you write going forward. And a whole person is body, mind, spirit, soul, and all of those factors can serve the story. You spend a lot of time in Jeremiah Whispers in the mind. You don't do much in the body. You don't do much in the spirit or soul. You could say heart as well, which is in the body, but you there's a lot of cerebral thinking by characters in the story, and less visceral experience, and less ethereal stuff between characters. Let's put it that way, which I would call the spirit soul. Um, so your default at the moment is thinking through, having characters think through their whole person experiences. So the number of times that characters are describing how it feels to have pain rather than just having pain, it undermines your characters, it diminishes the power of your story, and it keeps the reader at distance. And this is really the final point. I think knowing where you go and knowing what you learn, you will learn to be vulnerable in your writing. And I think when you were writing Jeremiah's Whispers, when you were writing Of the Tribe and Jumbo to a certain extent, you were trying to be a writer with a capital W, because then you didn't have to be a storyteller who engages an audience. You're going to learn to let people in, and in that learning, you're going to learn that you can create a haven for them to be in a different space for a while. And it's going to take you a while to understand this, that people come to your writing and inhabit it and populate it with their own experience, so that they don't have to be in that experience the rest of the time. And this comes down to something that I think you haven't heard them saying all this time, and they've been saying it. They love you. They love what you produce. They just want you to open your heart and do it for real and stop holding back. And that's my overall feeling from Jeremiah Whispers, is here's this thing that was massive, that you were writing to be massive and you were writing to be significant, when all the time it just needed to open and let those characters live and breathe and be the audience's characters rather than your own characters. So those are my notes to my younger writing self. Maybe when I get 3 or 4 years down the road here, actually it'll be 3 years from now, I can do the same with Jumbo Georgie and let you know more about what you're going to learn after that. So with that, I'm going to say bye-bye.